everyone. Thank you for attending today. I know more than ever your time is incredibly important and valuable, so thank you for being a part of this. I'm Jen Blaze from KBW and co-founder of the Executive Series. This is along the side of Next Level Now. Just want to take a quick moment to thank Next Level Now, Nathan Weschler, Clark and Levy, and KBW Financial Staff and Recruiting for sponsoring these events really throughout the whole year. Typically, these events are held in Portsmouth, but given our circumstances, we're very thankful for technology, and we'll also be emailing those CPE credits after the presentation. Today, we have Ryan Robinson, the Chief Service Officer at Mainstay Technologies, as our speaker. Obviously, we know technology is so incredibly important and it's factoring into our company culture. So we're really excited to hear about this topic, and I'll leave it here for Ryan to take the floor at this point.
All right, thanks so much, Jen. I really appreciate it. And speaking of technology, it's worth noting that Atlantic Broadband is actually having some site down issues this morning. So if anyone's having issues with connectivity or picture doesn't be working out well or what have you, it could be related to that. It may not be necessarily a Zoom problem. So thanks so much for joining us. I know I'm thankful to know a bunch of people. I saw a lot of names that I recognize, so I know a bunch of people on the call today, and wish that I could see you in person, but hopefully that time will come soon. And special thanks to Jen from KBW and Ashley Major from Nathan Wexler and Brandon and Ken from Next Level Now. Really appreciate everyone coming up with this great idea of the executive series and the willingness to move it to this online platform. I will say that I know, excuse me, that a lot of people are kind of zoomed out, as you could say. So I'll try to keep us moving along here quickly. And I know we've got this set for 2 hours, and there'll be CPE credits available for this topic. And so the goal will be, there's really two parts to this presentation. And so we'll try to take a quick 5-minute break after the first part. Everyone can get up from their seats and move around a little bit. It's tough to, it's one thing to have 2 hours in a session when everyone's together, and another to be sitting in front of your computer. And I get that difference, and I'm feeling the zoomed out feeling myself, if anyone else is feeling that too. So what we want to talk about today is where sort of two parts, are where technology meets remote culture and how to utilize technology to improve your culture as we are both in this kind of remote world right now, then as continue on, because the signs are that this will, even when lockdowns shut down or close out, that the business culture has shifted enough to where this remote culture is here to stay, at least to a larger percentage than it was before. And then we also, in the second part, want to talk about where remote culture meets security, and where remote culture meets insecurity, and how to secure your organization and technology and your data within this really new developing season that we're in. Housekeeping item is that we'll do Q&A at the end of each session. So rather than doing Q&A as I go, we'll just hold those questions, and then we'll do those at the end of each part. But I would really recommend and request that you not hold your questions per se, but type them into the chat box or into the Q&A section as soon as they come to your mind, rather than waiting, because the likelihood is you might forget them later on, or you just won't articulate them as well because it's a little farther away from when they first came to mind. So if you could just put those in as we go. Last note is drinking water very intentionally here, because this is the worst time in human history to have a cough. If you have a cough, everyone just assumes you've got it. And I actually ended up going and getting tested and getting checked out. And I was given the world's most annoying, dumb diagnosis, which is that I have something called irritable larynx, which basically is like a medical way of saying that I have a tickle in the back of my throat. It's most likely I've got some scratches, or it's just allergies, one of the two, but it makes so that when I talk and air hits the back of my throat, it kind of makes me cough. So if I cough like 300 times during this presentation, I'm so sorry. I'll try to hit the mute button, but on Zoom, it's a little harder to hit the mute button super quick. So I may not get to it every time. I'll try to flip that up when I do. So if anyone starts to feel as though they need the doctor for me during the course of the presentation, you don't have to. It's just irritable larynx. So, and forgive the 100 water swigs. All right, well, let's get right to it. All right, so this is called leveraging technology to cultivate your remote company culture. And actually, real quick, I'll go back to that slide. If you note there that our Director of Communications, Corey Hoyt, his email address is on there. So if any of you are interested in both the slides and the actual notes, we're happy to send those to you so that you don't feel like you've got to be frantically taking notes the whole time. We can send those to you after. So if you just want to email Corey, he'll send those right along to you. All right, so as I said, we want to talk about both sides of this, what I think is a really unified coin here, which is creating a positive culture, company culture in the remote world, and creating a secure culture all at the same time. So talk about creating a delightful company culture first. A delightful company culture ultimately makes lives better. And as we've moved to this new remote world, we all as leaders want to be cognizant of the fact that there may be some real sacrifices we're making in this, that excuse me, our team members may have, in certain senses, there may be real positives for them. The ability to work from home, to have more flexible work schedules and all of that. Those are great things that a remote company culture can provide. But there's also things that we sacrifice, and there is a connectivity that we lose. There's a sense in which, and there's a reason why many companies for a long time have said, no, we don't want to go fully remote or even partly remote, because we want all of those connections to be made. We want those water cooler conversations to happen. We want people to just have that human interaction. And so, now that we're losing some of that, and maybe if you're a company that's going almost fully remote, maybe you're going to lose all of that you had at that point. And so, there are a lot of reasons to focus on company culture, but we are going to have to be more intentional now more than ever. At the top of the list of reasons to focus on company culture is the fact that, company culture makes up a good chunk of our lives. We all spend, 40, 50, 60 hours a week, depending on your job role, at work and thinking about work. And so if we as leaders focus on creating a company culture that's delightful, and I love that word delightful, by the way, because I think it's an underused word, and I think it carries as such a real sense of meaning. And I think the bottom line here is that, it's easy to think that if you have better life-work balance and you focus on company culture, that it's just going to be about making people happier and more effective. But in reality, there's a benefit to the organization as well. Your culture will drive the happiness and productivity of your team, which will then create increased employee retention rates. Employee retention is directly tied to client retention. Client retention rates translate to the bottom line as such. And there's this Harvard Business School study that showed that profits can increase by as much as 25% by simply having a 5% increase in client retention. And client retention can directly be tied to the happiness of your team. So a delightful culture is wonderful for you as a person. It's wonderful for your team members, but there's a bottom line benefit as well. Now, as I was referencing, I think a distributed workforce requires an even greater level of cultural intentionality. Anything that's good in life, whether it's your marriage, your physical environment, your health, your relationships, anything that's good in life requires you to be focused on it and think about it. And yet, for all too often, it's the case that we think about a lot of elements of our business, and we allow the culture to sort of just organically develop and grow. And while that sounds nice to have an organically developed culture, in life, Even the organic things take intentionality. You have to be intentional to water those plants, and uh, even all the things that grow organically still need intentionality in order for them to be fully cultivated. And having workers be remote, a trend that's unlikely to end anytime soon, means that the previously built-in cultural triggers, how workspaces are arranged and the interior design and the passing in the hall conversation and in office and idea generation and those kinds of collaboration, those can't be relied on anymore. So as a result, we need to be thinking about technology more than ever, and effective technology tools are going to be more critical to make, to marry this intentionality that we have as leaders to actually ensuring a good, healthy life and a great company culture for our team. So, you think about the evolution of this. The industrial era created and then demanded different tools than the agrarian era. In the late 1800s, it was like life changed, the world changed, and new tools had to be developed when we moved from an agricultural society to an industrial one. And that is going to be the case here. We're moving from an in-person company world, or in-person business culture to an increasingly remote business culture. And so we're going to have to think about the different tools and the different technologies that are going to help us to navigate that. So what I want to talk to you about today are some examples of those tools. I want to give you some real practical technologies that you can be thinking about integrating, or think about integrating more fully, or integrating with a greater level of intentionality as you go. First, though, before we start talking about the individual tools, I want to give a few key principles. These are hopefully will sort of be the guiding lights that will make sense of everything else I'm going to say. The first key principle is it's better to be good than to look good when it comes to company culture. What we want to do is focus on making our teams and our clients happy, not on winning awards and doing all of the sort of outward shows of great company culture, but not really having that be authentic, truly integrated, something that's on our minds and something that we care about because of what's going on inside the organization as opposed to how it looks on the outside. Some of you may have seen that Jerry Seinfeld just came out with a new comedy special on Netflix. And I'm a big Jerry Seinfeld fan. I think he's had an unbelievable career. It's wild to think of that Jerry Seinfeld is worth $950 million. This is net worth. He's close to a billionaire. And then you think, okay, I think he's in his late 50s, maybe even early 60s, and he's a billionaire, close to it. Now, what probably is by the time, by now. So why is he up there still working so hard? Why does he have a special that he's putting out? Well, I think it's because he realizes that success is the result of putting in work, and putting in the work is actually inherently enjoyable. So he wasn't focused on in other words, he wasn't focused on making $950 million when he got into comedy. I'm sure he wanted to do well, but he was focused on writing great jokes. That's what made $950 million. Well, I think when it comes to company culture, oftentimes what I've seen is companies make the mistake of focusing on winning the awards and sort of looking great to the outside world, and not really truly developing the internal culture and thinking about how it is going to tie directly to the happiness of their teams and their clients. So better to be good than to look good. And the great thing about it is, in the end, you're going to look good as well. You're going to have, you're going to start with writing the joke and end up with the $950 anyway, as long as you focus on writing great jokes. Second principle, communication and relationships are the key. Communication is the key to positive relationships, and positive relationships are the key to great culture. It's as simple as that. It's easy to think that creating great culture is about having saunas in your break rooms and all of these things. But at the end of the day, it's about having great relationships and our intentionality to help build those. Our CEO, Ryan Barton, who I know some of you on this call know, I think he said it best. He said, I'm quoting him here, he said, "I reflect on and study culture regularly, how to understand, develop, and steward it well. Company benefits, policies, processes, offices, perks, etc., are important and play a significant role in building or squashing a great culture. I believe that what matters is the people on the team and how they treat each other. That's it. I'd rather work in a dumpy office with poor equipment and terrible benefits, but with people who care about each other, do the right thing, work hard, have fun, and are a dynamic and effective team than the reverse. Getting to work here at Mainstay, where we get to have both the great offices, equipment, and benefits, and the caring dynamic team, that's incredibly rewarding to all of us. Why do we prioritize culture so highly at Mainstay? Well, it comes back to our mission and to the core of how we define success: to give more than we get. Translation, that we care for others, that we do the right thing, that we create value for all. We use our resources and opportunities to help as many people flourish as we can, that we bless our clients, our team, our community, our environment, and all our stakeholders. And I love that. I think that's a beautiful summary of really this point, that it's about the people, it's about the relationships, and we need to keep that main thing the main thing, is as it said. And so, one of the things I love to think about is, they say that the two people who make the deepest impact on our happiness are our spouse, our relationship with our spouse or significant other, and our relationship with our boss. If those relationships are going great, our lives tend to be great. And if those relationships are going poorly, our lives tend to go poorly, which is fascinating to think that like 50% of that equation is a relationship that we have with our superior who we report to at work. And if that's true, my goodness, how much more do we need to be thinking about those internal relationships, especially the relationships between managers and their team? And that's really the heart of great company culture, is when those relationships are working well, people care for each other, and it's not so much about the perks that get all of the buzz in company culture. The third principle here is that great culture starts with modeling, not telling. For those of you who may have in college dipped into philosophy 101 or things like that, in Aristotle's ancient work on the art of rhetoric, aptly titled Rhetoric, Aristotle argued that the most powerful argument a human being can make is not with their words, but with their actions. That a man of really gifted intellectual powers and a smooth tongue can't even be heard by his audience if his actions contradict his arguments. But a man who lives justly and uprightly, he can say 3 words instead of many and convert a whole host of people to a brand new way of life, a new way of thinking. And so, we take from that great company culture has to start with leaders who truly live out the goodness that they want to see in the lives of their teams. So if you want to have great work life, if you want your team to have a great life-work balance, for instance, well, then you need to have that, right? You need to model that. If you want to have your leaders have great relationships with the people that are under them, well, then you need to have great relationships with the people under you and be thinking about that as much as they are. Modeling is going to be the true means by which we get there, and we help integrate this kind of delightful company culture. All right, so now let's switch gears and talk about the technology and how this plays into it. So technology tools to cultivate this kind of culture. First, let's talk about onboarding, team integrating onboarding. The first experience our team members have with our company sets the tone. When a new employee comes on board, their first days and weeks really inform whether they feel like they made the right or wrong decision, and stays with them for years. I mean, the energy that they come back, for instance, and if they tell their husband or wife or children or whoever, if they say, yeah, this is what my first experience has been working at the company, and they come back with that energy gets then reflected back to them by their family and creates this sort of spiral of goodwill that we've seen lasting for months and years to come, because it started out on the right foot. So, one thing to think about in this, or let me give you a few things to think about. I mean, during interviews, candidates will often ask the interviewees, when we do interviews at Mainstay, what their perceptions are of Mainstay, which I think is a great question. So we'll have an interviewee say to the interviewer, hey, what do you guys think about Mainstay? What's your experience been working here? And often those stories begin when our team members talk about Mainstay. Often they will start that articulation of how it is to work at Mainstay. They'll start with what their experience was and how they were treated during their first week at the company, which is really cool. And, that can be everything from, having a new computer that's ready and waiting for them and isn't delayed, where they come on board and the new hire has to wait a couple days to get their new computer, or software licenses that haven't been turned on and allow them to be ready to roll. So, one of the things that we need to do is make sure that we're working with IT in advance to make sure all the technology pieces are in place for that first day. I think that can be a massive tone setter. Also, trainings should be scheduled. The team members should have some schedule and table of contents that we give them to give them a sense of what that first phase of their onboarding looks like. In Mortimer Adler's great book called How to Read a Book, he says that the first thing you do when you read a book, simple as it sounds, is read through the table of contents. Because if you read through the table of contents, and actually, secondly, next thing you should do when you go through a book is read all of the sort of the first paragraphs, or at least first sentences of each chapter, because that gives you a real sense of where you're going. And that ability to know where you're going helps you understand the whole, see how the individual parts fit into the whole, help you learn it better, help you understand what's going on. That's exactly what we want to give. We want to give new hires a kind of table of contents to what their onboarding is going to look like, what the pieces are, how it's going to be scheduled, and that's going to allow them to sort of breathe, as it were, going into that process. We should also proactively connect them with positive examples and influences. So one of the easy things to do is when you're onboarding a new hire, kind of let them come on board, meet who they are going to meet sort of along the way. But in a remote culture, especially, you're going to have to be even more intentional about that. So I always recommend that you think of some all-stars in your organization who just bleed your company culture, who are positive forces, who just, you're around them and you want to be better yourself, and you catch a glimpse of how great the company is through their energy, enthusiasm. Find ways to intentionally connect those people with your new hires. Have trainings be with them. Have shadowings be with those kinds of folks. Second, I want to, those are some sort of sub-bullet points under the first experience sets the tone. Let me talk about the second bullet point, considering the family. Consider the significant other and the family as part of the onboarding process, not just the new employee. So one of the things that we do, for instance, at Mainstay, we have, when a new employee comes on board, we actually give a gift basket to the significant other and or the children of the family members who are connected, not just sort of gifts or welcomes to the new hire themselves. And part of the reason is that, look, family is deeply impacted by the work that person is going to do for your company. And in a certain sense, you could say that the family also sacrifices alongside the new hire. I mean, those days where someone's got to work late and can't make a baseball game or whatever. So we should try to avoid those situations whenever we possibly can, and not create situations where those are the norm. But it just happens in the course of work and life. And so it's families that often make those sacrifices for the company in those moments, and we need to honor that. And as I referenced earlier, I think that if you can connect with those family members, let them know how much you appreciate their significant other, or their dad, or whoever, their mom, that means a lot to them. It can help create that sort of cycle of positive energy. All right, now let's talk about the sort of the technology specifically in terms of software. Software and hardware, right? Those are the two sides of the technology coin. Hardware, computers, laptops, tablets. Oftentimes in the IT world, it's the hardware that gets all of the focus and attention on having fast computers and making sure things are secure and all of that. But in reality, the hardware, it only exists for the software. All of our technology infrastructure simply exists to allow organizations to move things forward, to send and receive data, to send and receive communication, to be able to analyze data and put it in appropriate reports. All of it lives for the applications. So for onboarding, here's a couple, I want to give you a couple recommendations related to onboarding software. One's called Trainual. Trainual is a fantastic onboarding software that allows you to complete all of the paperwork, all of the training components within a single platform. So you give them a Trainual login when they come on board. And I said earlier about establishing that table of contents. that's exactly what Training will provide. You can have all of the different trainings within there. Training will give you external trainings that you can deliver to the new hires, but then you can also upload your own trainings as well. So they'll have a really clear sense of, here's what phase 1 looks like, here's what phase 2 looks like, and here's what is going to exist within each of these phases within the onboarding process. Another one is called WorkBright. WorkBright's a little bit more expensive, but a little bit more enterprise level. It's simple and an easy. I mean, it's the flow of it is really user friendly, and it's a simple, easy onboarding tool that can be you can use it. It's super friendly with mobile, with tablets, all of that. So no matter what kind of job you're bringing on, if you're bringing someone in the warehouse on and they're only going to have a remote tablet, or if you're bringing on an office employee, they're going to have a full computer. WorkBright looks really nice on all platforms, and it's got a super easy flow. And similar to Training, you can put in external trainings, the trainings that are inherent within the platform, and you can add your own as well. So those, if you have the sense that you've got maybe an HR manager that's doing a great job, and you've got a good onboarding process, but you need to marry technology and process, these two tools in particular, I'd highly recommend. And, going back to the idea of remote culture, we're going to need to be more intentional about using these kind of platforms, especially when we're onboarding people in a kind of fully or partially remote manner, because now we're not going to be able to rely on, the person coming in and sitting at the HR manager's desk, and all of the warmth and care and context that all brings. We're going to need to start thinking about these kinds of tools. All right, let's talk about HR a little bit more fully. Culture building HR. How do you build a delightful culture leveraging HR to its fullest in a world of remote work? So one is, I would recommend turning HR in your thinking around from being a hiring and firing machine, or even a recruiting machine, to really being a culture building team. We talk a lot about being proactive in a lot of areas of our business, certainly in the areas that are critical to our work. When we think about being proactive in sales marketing, and being proactive with service delivery, and being proactive with account management, and proactive with reporting and analytics, business intelligence. But I think that HR, just as a general rule, oftentimes is thought of as a more reactive part of the organization. There's a sort of assumption that HR is this place where, once something is wrong, then you bring HR in. If someone is having performance challenges, then you bring in HR. If you're having trouble getting people hired, then you bring in HR. But I think that when HR is best is when it turns that around, and we turn HR into this sort of change management, culture building engine for our organization. So how do you do that? Well, I think you've got to reset HR's goals. And I know there's a lot of HR folks and people that know a lot more about this world than I do. So love to hear some comments, some recommendations from the folks in the Q&A here. But the first way to reset the goal is give your HR person or team a set of goals for managers if there's no formal HR in place, and charge them to, one, increase employee retention so that you don't have to hire. So instead of thinking about HR as being the reactive, we built the business in such a way where now we have more need. Now we look to HR to hire. Instead, focus your HR folks on increasing employee retention so that you don't even have to get into that. And if you can increase employee retention by 10% and you grow by 10%, well, great. Now you don't even have to hire anyone, and you can gain from all the efficiencies of having people who've been there, known the processes and develop the workflows and all the built-in cost advantage that brings. Second, charge HR to implement the kind of career growth tracks that motivate employees and prevent them from poor performance in the first place. So again, it's easy to think HR comes in when people have performance issues. What if we flip that, encourage HR to develop the kind of intentional growth tracks to say, how do we help people have a vision for where they're going? Giving people a vision is an unbelievably powerful tool. And then we're there's a great Bible verse that says, without a vision, the people perish. And I think that that's very true in business, right? That if people can see ahead and say, this is where my career is going, this is where my role is headed, this is where I am going to succeed and flourish and find success. If you give them that vision, then the likelihood of them running into performance challenges, the likelihood of them being unmotivated, the likelihood of all of these sort of, relationship challenges and lack of work output, all of that can, if not go away, at least considerably shrink. And then third, proactively, charge HR to proactively improve communication workflows amongst your team so that breakdowns don't occur within teams and between managers in the first place. Harkening back to my point about that the relationship we have with our boss tends to be one of the key, if not, one of the two key relationships in our whole lives, then shouldn't we be spending a lot more time thinking about communication workflows, thinking about how we can direct managers to communicate more frequently with better effectiveness to the people that they are leading. And again, I think that this is more critical than ever when we're talking about living in a remote world, where a lot of the communication that we might just assume would happen naturally is not going to necessarily occur. So let's talk about the software side of this. And going back to that idea that we're going to need these software tools more than ever, because we are no longer going to be able to rely on some of the sort of surrounding physical realities that businesses typically relied on to make this happen. I mean, even something super simple like a lot of organizations, new hire comes on board and they give them a physical stack of paper and say, okay, here's what you're going to be doing. Here's your job description. And have this sort of handbook. Even that simply goes away in this model. Now you can send a PDF, of course, but hopefully you're getting the idea that software helps us to make sure that not just that we're delivering the right information, but that we can marry the information to the workflows, and then sort of like the trinity of this is marry the information, the workflows, and then the communication delivery, have those all come together. That's what these kind of software packages allow us to do. So a couple recommendations here. One is called Gusto. Gusto is is really a complete package HR management system or an HRMS. It's a full service payroll, benefits administration, and onboarding. So when we talked about the other onboarding tools, this can kind of encapsulate all of them. This is a great option for a system that provides a compliant onboarding and e-signatures requirements as well. So if you need to get forms e-signed and you're going to really be on the front edge of that remote onboarding, Gusto is fantastic. It is expensive. I mean, expense is always relative, right? Amongst all of the different HRMSs out there, Gusto tends to be one of the more expensive ones, but it's because it's the most comprehensive. And when you have a comprehensive solution, it tends to be that you don't have to, well, one, buy multiples, and you gain from efficiencies that are built into that. One of the things that I would say mistakes we see organizations make, and that we ourselves at Mainstay have made in our history, is not allowing software itself to inform our workflows, and trying to start with our workflows and then find a software that sort of we can customize or align to all of the pre-built workflows. Now, there are two sides of that coin, and that is also a good thing. Having those workflows, customized to your organization does make sense, and I'm not encouraging anyone to stop doing that. But a lot of these tools, especially comprehensive tools like Gusto, have a lot of built-in workflows that really, if you think about it, are the summation of a lot of different organizations that use that software, are providing input to the software provider saying, hey, this is a workflow that we use. Can you customize your software to be able to do that? And over time, what happens is if you allow a piece of software like Gusto or an application like Gusto to inform your processes, instead of assuming you fit your processes into a certain software application, you actually gain from the efficiencies developed by many other organizations throughout the country or even the world. And you're getting all of the input from them in this way that you don't have to sort of pay the consultant to deliver for you. So I'm a big fan of these kind of more comprehensive solutions. Another option is called Rippling. Rippling is an HR platform with similar onboarding, payroll, and benefits. What it does lack is an LMS function or a learning management system component. So, if you want to do additional training or onboarding beyond the kind of legal compliance pieces, some of those standard things, you would have to use a separate LMS. But if your organization just doesn't need that LMS integration, then Rippling can be a less expensive, but still fairly comprehensive option. All right. Now let's talk about training. So first of all, the benefits of proper training. When people, simply put, when people know how to use their software tools effectively, they're more confident and they're happier. And if they're more confident and happier, they create better work products more efficiently, more securely, and are much more likely to feel valued and appreciated. It's not that hard to put those pieces together. It's like if you train your people, they're going to be more effective. Effectiveness leads to happiness. My kids, so we're cultivating in our family, kind of musical family. So I play the piano, and I have 7 children actually, which explains why I don't have any hair and why I've got a lot of gray hair. I have 7 children, and the ones that are old enough at this point to play instruments, I'll do play a mix of fiddle and guitar and mandolin, and I play the piano. And so we love to play as a family and have family jam sessions. It's a lot of fun. I highly recommend it. What we found is that at the beginning stages of when our kids learn instruments, they don't like them. They don't like them, and they want to quit. And so we've established a rule in our family that says, hey, you're in it for the long haul. I'm sorry, you're not going to have the option to quit. And so that allows the kids to kind of relax a little bit, not feel like, if they just complain more, then we'll maybe let them out of it. And that expectation setting has been really helpful, and it has made it so that all of them have sort of pushed through some of those initial phases and gotten to a level of mastery that they really enjoy. And so all of our older kids, they love music, and they articulate very clearly that they're so thankful that they play and that they wouldn't trade it for anything. But it took time. They had to get effective in order to enjoy it. That's the irony of human life, is that we don't enjoy things that when we start doing them. And unfortunately, that makes it tough, because when we first start doing this, our first experience with them, right? Well, the same thing is the case in the work world. Imagine a machinist showing up at work and not truly understanding how the machine he's operating works. Imagine a carpenter not knowing how to properly use a square. Like, they'd be ineffectual at best, but they're definitely going to be miserable. They're not going to be valued, not going to be confident, and you're not going to create a great company culture, in other words, until training is seen as a key element to creating that great company culture. You can't just assume that it's just about all of the other trappings of culture. If I were to take Ryan Barton's quote above and add to it, it's like, yeah, I'd rather take great relationships and people that care about each other and do the right thing. We'll take that over all of the sort of Silicon Valley perks that get a lot of press. We'll take that over those any day of the week. But even if you have great people who love each other, care for each other, are willing to help each other, all of that, but the individuals themselves don't know how to do their jobs as effectively, and therefore lack a level of confidence, they're not going to be happy regardless of how nice people are. They're still going to feel undervalued, because they are going to be undervalued because they're not going to have the right level of training. And and you might think, okay, Ryan, I get it. You think training is important. Move on. Here's the reason I'm pushing it so hard, is because I have seen, both in my own thinking, in our company and in many of the organizations we work with, that training is like seen as this thing that we always ought to do, and that once we get over this hurdle, then we're going to focus on training more fully. And it never happens. That hurdle never, or a new hurdle just arises, and it's not until you really lock in that you're going to experience that kind of cultural benefit and boost. So how do you do that? Well, you make training official. I think that's the key. You have to make a training program really official. So what you have to do is first, you have to have a leader in charge of training. And this can be someone in HR. It can be someone who just in your organization has a particular passion about training. Probably each of you on this call can think, yeah, I know this person, this man, this woman who loves training. And it can be them. Maybe they're not in HR, but they just have a passion about it, and this can be assigned. Until you put a leader in charge of training, training won't happen because no one has accountability and has that as a defined part of their job role. So if it's simply left up to the executives, let's say, to get training going in some sort of ambiguous, pie in the sky way, it's just not going to happen. It's got to be assigned to someone. Second of all, you need to put an actual training program in place and think of it as a program. So that program should have really clear goals. You should have proper training platforms like an LMS, a learning management system. You should also have incentives as part of that training program. So you need to incentivize your people to say, all right, here's a bonus that you're going to get if you have this particular training. Here are ways in which we are going to publicly acknowledge what kind of trainings that you've gone. At Mainstay, when we do technical certifications are huge for us. So at Mainstay, we send out all company emails when someone gets a new training certification. And we also praise them at all staff meetings, and we give them actual financial bonuses when they complete certain certification tracks. And then accountability. Accountability is the last part of that training program. So those should be, your training goals should be a part of an annual review or a quarterly review for each employee. When you get those two things combined, when you get a leader in charge of training, so someone really owns it within the organization, and then you have a program in place that, of course, the leader can help develop, that's when sort of magic starts occurring with people really getting the training they need and all the company culture benefits that take place there. So in terms of software, here's some training platform options. The first is called Brainstorm. Brainstorm, I would say, is not great for really nuanced application training. Like let's say you use a very, let's say you're in a manufacturing company and you use JobBoss. Well, Brainstorm is not going to be super helpful with like the individual niche applications, the individual line of business applications. But for the applications that almost all of us use, the Office Suite, Adobe, et cetera, Brainstorm is a great online platform where $5 per user per month gets your team access to all of these trainings. And they're much better, much more professionally put together than if you're, going to try to put together a list of YouTube links or something like that. So Brainstorm is an option. There's another one called Lessonly. Lessonly is a very robust learning management system, but it does have a limited onboarding component. So it's not a great one if you're thinking you want to combine onboarding and training into one platform. Lessonly really specializes in trainings specifically around customer service, sales, learning and development. So if you're in one of those industries, then Lessonly is a really great option. The best of the bunch is called Absorb LMS. Absorb is one of the highest rated LMSs. A lot of leading organizations use it. And it has a lot of integration benefits. It integrates with Zoom for online meetings and trainings. It has a mobile app so teams can learn on any device. If they're on a plane traveling somewhere, they can still bust it out and get through a training. And in addition to training internal employees, you can build training for external customers too and partners. So you could say, all right, we want to build out a training so that our clients understand a certain element of what they need to know in order to work with us more effectively. For us, we have a lot of organizations, for instance, that have where there's a point of contact that works with us, and they need to really understand the nuances of how Mainstay works. And so those are key. We have these training, all point of contact trainings that are so key and help move forward the relationship. And so a tool like Absorb LMS can do that for you. Okay, next let's talk about communications. And some of you may be, this may be a world that maybe most of you are interested in right now, because we're always having to think about, okay, in-person communication goes away, and so it sets the stage for these kinds of platforms like we're on Zoom and so on. But before we talk about the platforms and before we talk about the technology related to having great communication, let me just say a couple sort of preliminary notes. The first is that tight-knit communication is going to be more important than ever in a remote world. And I'm sure, we've been in this, 3 months now? It's not like at the beginning where we were just sort of figuring out what this all is going to mean and the importance of all this. Tight-knit communication is going to be more critical to having a great company culture in the months and years ahead than it's ever been. And it's always been important, but now it will be more important than ever. And so I think one of the key things to think of, instead of starting with the platforms and going, what's the technology we put in place? First, start with the idea of the communication method hierarchy, okay? The communication method refers to like the tool that you use when you are communicating. It's not so much the individual words that you say, that would be like the communication content, but rather the method is how you deliver the communication. And that can be everything from, a phone call to a text to a Zoom meeting to in person. Even in person is actually part of that hierarchy and is higher up on the hierarchy. Back in the 60s, there was a writer named Marshall McLuhan who coined the term, the medium is the message. And he was specifically talking to journalists and people in the mass media world. But he was pointing out that the nature of the communication medium changes the very essence of what's being communicated. So whereas we can easily think that the communication method is sort of arbitrary, and it's really about the content that matters, what McLuhan argued is that the medium, the delivery mechanism, is so integrated with the message that the two can't be actually pulled apart. And so that actually communication in person is by its very nature different than communication over over Zoom or over a phone call or what have you. In business, I think we ignore that principle at the peril of our company cultures. There are many different methods that can be used within our organizations, from text-based to disembodied forms like video chat or texting or IM. And there are more personal forms like, I think actually video is a more personal form. You get to see people's facial expressions and all that. Phone is also a more personal form because you can hear voice inflections and so on, where, in text-based form like texting and email, and for us in our world, ticket notes and all that, those take on a disembodied form without human voice inflection and all of that. And then of course, in person is the most human of them all. And each of these methods should really be thought of as different ways, or not thought of, as different ways to communicate the same thing, but as shaping the nature of the communication. So we need to train our team to go really as personal and as embodied, I'd argue, as appropriate for a given situation. So in other words, if you can make a phone call instead of sending an email, try to do that. Now, the objection could be, well, the email is a lot more efficient and goes faster. Well, I would take a little bit of umbrage with that. I think that there have been many times I know in my career where I have sent an email and it's taken way longer to craft the email, think about the potential objections that the person on the other side may come up with, almost like get ahead of those objections and try to articulate them, even though maybe they didn't even have those objections in the first place. And I've had times where I've spent half hour on an email that if I would have just picked up the phone, it would have taken 3 minutes. So we shouldn't assume that the embodied forms are necessarily less efficient. I don't think that they are. Now, that can be the case, and that's why I'm being careful here to say that, look, if you can make a phone call instead of an email, then send it. But there's going to be times where that's not appropriate. If you can do a video chat instead of a phone call, do that, because that's higher up on that embodied scale. If you can be in person rather than over video, do that. All of these things will improve the quality of the communication and really reshape the form of that communication in a profound way that will make it more human. There'll be more interconnective, relational interconnective tissue. I remember when I was a kid, some of you may remember this commercial. When I was a kid, I grew up in New England, and this was back before the Verizon merger, and there was a company called New England Telephone. And New England Telephone had this really great but potentially deceptive tagline called "Reach Out and Touch Someone." And I remember one of the commercials that New England Telephone had was the commercial started, and you saw this nice suburban home, and a mom called down to her son, "Hey, Johnny, Grandpa's on the phone." And Johnny runs downstairs, and he's got his baseball uniform on, and he picks up the phone. And then it cuts over to his grandfather. His grandfather is in this like nice room with a fire going and a nice warm sweater on, And the grandfather says, "Oh, Johnny, I am so proud of you. How did the game go?" And Johnny says, "Oh, it was incredible. I hit a double, and it was amazing." And the grandfather's like, "Oh, I remember when I was playing baseball, and this was the great experience I had," and so on. And you had see this warm, beautiful interaction. And then there's all soft music playing in the background. And then at the end of the commercial, you see their tagline, New England Telephone, "Reach out and touch someone." And the idea was, of course, that this form of communication was sort of a replacement for this in-person, that you can really over the phone, like, reach out and touch someone. Now, there's truth to it. It's not fully a lie, but there's also a lot of falsehood in it too. And I know, especially if you think about kids, do kids really develop deep relationships in their pre-communication heavy time of their lives? Do they develop that through phone calls and even Marco Polo and Zoom calls or whatever? No, it's more like being in person. A grandson and a grandfather will probably connect much more intimately throwing a baseball back and forth than they would be verbally talking about a game that the boy just played in. Or even if that grandfather was at the game, that's probably going to create even a more emotionally bonding connection than talking about the game together. So I think that principle holds true in business as well. And so we need to be thinking about that communication method hierarchy and pointing and saying to our teams, look, we're living in a remote world now where we're going to have less of that higher form communication automatically. We're going to have less in-person communication just because it's not going to be possible. So whereas in the past, maybe it wouldn't have been that big a deal to send an email instead of having a phone call. Now it's going to be more important to move higher up on that chain because we're going to miss a lot of the connective tissue that we would naturally have when we're in the office with our teammates, or we're going on site to a client and meeting with them in person. So I hope that's a helpful sort of framework to think of that before we talk about the tools. Actually, just one more note on that. I know at Mainstay, one of the things that we did early on is we tried to default to video conferencing versus phone calls. Whereas in the past, prior to March, even though we used these video conferencing tools and used them regularly, they weren't the default. It was more like the default was a phone call. And if it made sense because we needed to screen share or whatever, then we would move to a video call. We just said, hey, let's actually default to video because we're going to need more of this connective tissue. Now, this is a balance that every organization has to work out themselves. And what's going to be the right fit in their culture. That may not be the right fit in every culture. So I'm not saying as a blanket rule, you should do that, but it's a way of thinking about this. And hopefully it's a helpful framework, that communication method hierarchy. So let's talk about the specific tools now. I want to talk to you about just real briefly about something called unified communications. Unified communications are essentially the dream of where communication technology has been headed over the years. And we've sort of hit the peak of unified communications. What that means simply defines that unified communication tool when you have all of the different communication tools. So from phone to video conferencing to screen sharing to text to IM to walkie-talkie type of communication methods, all of those live under a single platform so that you're not picking up your phone when you need to make a phone call and then going to a particular application when you need to send an email, or going to a particular video conferencing platform and then going to a different platform in order to do a screen share. So really reach that. And the two best of breed unified communication platforms are Microsoft Teams and Cisco WebEx. Now you might say, well, wait, you're using Zoom right now. Isn't this one of them? No, Zoom is not. And not that's not a knock on Zoom. I actually think that Zoom is a fantastic tool, particularly for these kind of like webinar functions. but it's not truly a unified communications platform because it can't do everything. It can't be all of the communication all in one. It's not going to function as an IM tool for your organization and your phone system. So it's not going to do that in a way that Microsoft Teams and Cisco WebEx can. So I want to give a plug for those two. It's really worth evaluating, working with your IT team to see which of those tools might make a lot of sense. And let's say that you use Teams. I know a lot of organizations do this where they'll use Microsoft Teams for certain things, but then they'll use Zoom for video conferencing. That's fine. There's nothing inherently wrong with that by any stretch. But Teams is getting better and better at the video conferencing side all the time, and developing, like, so for instance, one of the reasons that Zoom was very popular at the very beginning of this whole, the quarantine phase, was that they could do the multi-screen where you can scroll through and see a lot of different people as long as they have their video on. Whereas Teams, it originally only had the 4 boxes. Well, Teams now is, I think, up to 8. I think you can have up to 8 people on a single screen. They still don't have the scroll yet, which I know is in development and should be coming soon. But if you can live in one platform, one of the powerful things about Teams in particular is that it can be your phone system. So a lot of organizations are trying to figure out, okay, well, in a remote world, what do we do for phones? Well, Teams and Cisco WebEx can both be your phone system to where you can use soft phones now, which just means instead of that physical device on your desk where you push physical buttons to make calls, that becomes a software application that lives on your computer, and then you use a headset instead of using a handset and a physical receiver. A lot of times people think, oh, that's going to be a big change for our organization. We have a lot of people in the company that aren't very technically savvy, and that's going to be a big hurdle. We have found that it's a much bigger psychological hurdle at the beginning than it's actually a practical hurdle. Once people have headsets and have the most basic, instead of pushing the buttons here, you just push them on your computer screen. Basic training like that will basically turn people who are most diehard physical phones into big fans of soft phones, essentially overnight. So really worth looking into. The benefit of tools like Teams and Cisco WebEx, and I'm going to talk about that in part 2 when we talk more about security, is that they can be managed by your IT team in a much more granular way than a tool like Zoom or some of the individual video conferencing platforms can. So you can integrate IT and security and cybersecurity in a much more powerful way. All right, let's talk about the keys. So now that I've hopefully not overwhelmed you with different tools and different strategies here, let's just finish up this section with talking about keys to manage all of this, and keys to manage these technology tools as you seek to get more technologically savvy and integrate technology more effectively in your remote cultures. First thing, have internal champions around every tool. That sounds like a big thing when you first think of it. It sounds like an intimidating prospect. But in practice, it's really not. And what typically happens, again, if you're not intentional about it, this will just happen organically. But because of it not happening intentionally, it means you won't have the process and workflows and thoughtfulness behind it. So really what we recommend is if you have a tool, let's say you have a particular kind of business application that you use, or you use one of these tools like an LMS like Trainual or whatever, you should always think, okay, we're bringing this tool in. Who is going to be our internal champion for this system? You don't assume that the internal champion needs to be someone in IT. In fact, most of the time, it should not be someone in IT, but it should be someone within the organization that has to live in that system a lot. And ideally, it should be someone who has to kind of oversee how that system is going to be integrated and used. That internal champion can work with IT to make sure that there's a really clean implementation and integration of that tool. That person can then be, that internal champion can be the person who integrates and connects directly with your training program manager that I was referring to earlier, and be able to deliver that training manager or whoever owns training for the organization can deliver to them advice or direction on, hey, here are the areas where we have this tool that's really powerful, but we need more training on, and there can be great communication. So in other words, if you have that internal champion, they can sort of be the middleman, the center point, to make sure that there's a lot of really good information and internal understanding of that system, and that they can connect with IT about that. They can connect with your training program manager, and they can connect with the executive team or whoever else is in management to make sure that the business goals are driving towards that software solution tool and being delivered effectively. Real quick, by the way, just note on that training program manager, I do not mean that training program manager, whoever you decide is going to own that training program, I did not mean to imply in any way that needs to be a full-time job. In fact, I think most of the time it doesn't. Until you hit a certain scale level, it probably doesn't need to be a full-time job. And that's why I think it can be something that isn't something integrated into HR or communications. It could live under various different departments, but oftentimes it's just a part-time role, but it's something that has to be designated and set up and set as the expectation that, oh, you're going to own this piece moving forward. So again, first, have internal champions for any of the tools that you integrate. Second, have secure workflows. And I'm going to talk more about that in the next session, but secure your workflows, your people, and your applications, not just your IT infrastructure. It's super easy for an organization to think, how are we doing related to this security? And for someone in the organization to respond to that, well, let me go ask IT. The implication being that IT is the one who's going to own security for the organization. But in reality, you have to have secure people too, not just secure IT. You have to have secure facilities, not just secure IT. And you need to have secure workflows for your applications and how you're sending and receiving data and what data you're putting in to these systems and all of that. So you need to think about having integrated security into the workflows for how you use these applications. And again, I'll talk a little bit more detail about that in the next session. And then lastly, have a trusted partner. Work with an organization, a technology partner that's going to help you utilize these tools to the fullest and help direct you and guide you both on what you need for your infrastructure to be able to support these tools effectively, but also help have this mindset, this understanding, so that they can help direct you and guide you in what potential tools you could use, how to integrate them within your organization, and be that great consultant to work with the training manager and work with your internal software champions to really make sure that this thing is humming. Final note on all this is that when you get the need, okay, when you put all of these things together, you understand the need for intentionality in your company culture as your organization moves remote. Then once you understand the need, you get intentional about it, and you start focusing HR towards being proactive with it, and you start putting the right tools in place, and you start realizing, okay, I'm going to need to get really ahead of company culture and not simply just allow it to grow organically, but really treat it proactively. And then when you get the right tools in place, and then fourth, you have the appropriate internal expectations around managing those tools and integrating them and making sure that they're meeting the business needs. When you have those four things all work in harmony, that will from that arise the company culture that all of us want, and that will create happy team members, and that will have these both life joy quotients increase, but then we'll also have real bottom line impacts, because our people are going to be more effective. We're going to have better employee retention. We're going to have better client retention. We're going to have better client, net promoter score surveys go higher, and all of this is going to hum. But in a certain sense, there is this core of company culture that all of that flows from, and it's not something to be handled reactively, but really to be gotten ahead of. So I hope that was helpful. And before we take a break here, I'm going to check out and see if we have any questions. All right, someone asked a good question here. How do you think the payroll service embedded onboarding programs compare to the independent programs like the ones you recommend? Well, that's a great question. I think writ large, that question can be applied to anything where it's like comprehensive solution versus independent. And so I would say that the framework for that thinking is is to say that independent solutions tend to be able to specialize, right? So let's take Zoom as an example. Zoom, because they do one thing and try to do that one thing really well, they tend to, well, hit the mark and do that one thing really well. And so if your organization, let's say, didn't need a comprehensive unified communications platform, and the business goals just didn't align with that, then using a single best of breed software is a great way to go and is recommended over getting something comprehensive. Now, flip side is, okay, the comprehensive solutions tend to be what they are trying to be good at is being comprehensive. And so they may not in each individual module, you could say, be as enterprise or as quality or as effective as the individual best of breed software. So as an organization, you have to say, well, what are our business goals? Are our business goals to have these single applications be best of breed, but recognize that the con of that is going to be that we don't have an integrated system, or, take Zoom as an example, that we can't have IT be quite as granular in their cybersecurity controls on that. And we've all seen the stories of some of the Zoom security hacks that have happened, for instance. Other cons of that best of breed are the fact that you're often going to pay more. If you just go single best of breed across the board, you're going to typically pay a lot more once you start adding up those individual costs, whereas comprehensive tends to be a more defined economical solution that can scale. And in fact, that's another con. Oftentimes, the individual applications have trouble scaling up with an organization, because what is just a general truism in business is that as you scale up, you need a greater level of central management visibility, let's say. And so you're going to need something that's more like an ERP, where you're going to get comprehensive reporting on multiple different fronts, whereas in an individual application, you're only going to get reporting, if it even has reporting integrated with it, you're only going to get reporting on a very particular slice of the pie. So I would say if it's helpful, an additional insight on this is that there is a third way, okay? So if we've got comprehensive solutions here versus independent best of breed solutions, individual sliced up in pies here, there is a third way, which is to go with the individual best of breed solutions and then layer onto those solutions a business intelligence tool. So for instance, Microsoft has a tool called Power BI, Power Business Intelligence, which is a really powerful business intelligence platform that can build reporting gauges and dashboards that can be then layered on a bunch of independent solutions, but still give you centralized reporting. Now, it's still not going to give you all the comprehensive, it's not going to deliver anything comprehensively like those other pieces, those other more comprehensive solutions will, but at least from a reporting standpoint and visibility standpoint, it will be more comprehensive in the way that a comprehensive solutions independent or native reporting will be able to provide. So I hope that helps. Let's see. If you are in a regulated industry where you need to track specific training to prove competency in process or task, do any of those fit the bill? Yeah, so an example of one of them, which is particularly good with that, is Rippling. So Rippling, they tend to market towards organizations that are more in the high compliance and more highly regulated industries. So they do a really good job with all of the kind of legal processing and legal documentation, all that can be integrated with it. So if you use Rippling, you might be able to save some money on the on your attorney bill, because a lot of that is natively built in. Let's see here. So I think there's another question that I think should be handled more directly. So I'm going to not answer that question, and I'm going to save some time here and start a break, and I'll try to answer that question directly. But this has been enjoyable to talk this through. Hopefully it's been enjoyable on the other end. And why don't we take a quick 5-minute break? So let's show back up here at 12:15, and then we'll start diving into cybersecurity and information security and how that connects with building a great remote culture and building particularly a secure remote culture, which is the other key side of this coin. So, all right, thanks so much, and I'll see you in a few minutes. All right. All right. Well, hopefully everyone can still see the screen here. Let's dive back in and finish up our discussion with discussing security, a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and I'm quite passionate about. And the connection here is clear, or I want to make the connection clear between these two discussion points. We've been talking about security, or excuse me, we've been talking about how to create a delightful company culture and how to utilize technology effectively to create a really great, impactful and enjoyable company culture, despite being in this remote work world that we have been living in fully and heading into, at least partially moving forward. Well, all of this requires security, because just like as we move more remote, just like some of the built-in pieces of company culture go away, and we have to be more intentional about. Similarly, a lot of the built-in elements of security go away in this remote world, and our attack surfaces increase when we move into remote and everyone's working from home, and some people are using personal computers, and we're using remote access technology to get into data instead of our hardwired connections that we had at the office. A lot of things have changed in this and have made us more susceptible to insecurity through this process. I know a lot of the folks that are on this call are in finance, and probably many of you oversee IT directly and security directly. So I hope this is very relevant to all of you. So let's first start by talking about cybersecurity in 2020 and the situation that we're in. First is that we have cloud services are increasing our attack surfaces, and the more remote we are, the more we're utilizing cloud services. So if your IT strategic plan over the last few years has involved moving more and more of your infrastructure and application to the cloud, no doubt that has been solidified over the last few months or has just increased rapidly. And there were organizations that had to, unfortunately, make significant changes almost overnight because they really weren't prepped and ready for this. And so cloud services are great in the sense they enable us to be remote like this, but they also increase our attack surface, meaning they increase all the places that our data lives. So instead of our data living on our server at our office, now that data is living in a data center somewhere and may hit 30 to 300 different web servers before it comes back to us. And that's just one example of the way in which it increases our attack surface. Secondly, national breaches are impacting everyone's data. One of the great examples of this is the LinkedIn hack that happened a few years ago, where LinkedIn's whole database of username and passwords was breached and dumped on the dark web. If you were on LinkedIn in 2017, you would have gotten an email, I think it was around November, from LinkedIn saying, hey, change your password. But you know what? A lot of people didn't change their passwords. And some of you may be hearing this and going, oh, shoot, I don't think I changed my password, my LinkedIn password in the last few years. Maybe I'm one of those people who didn't. Because if you didn't, it means that your password is very likely sitting on the dark web somewhere, just waiting for someone to pick up and utilize and try to apply to not just your LinkedIn account, but other accounts where you may use that same exact username and password combination, or email and password combination. So we're often affected deeply by these national breaches. Feel like they're far away, but actually hit us really close to home. Social media is making it easier to social engineer than ever, and this is even more so now that we've got this national pandemic. Gives the hackers a lot more ammo to utilize against people. But also, we're just giving more and more of our information away on social media than ever before. So, a CFO, let's say, mentions on Facebook that they are going on vacation. Well, if the CFO's Facebook permissions aren't locked down very well, and the public can see that in that post, and not just the friends or a select group of people can see that post, well, that means that now if you're a social engineer, you have a lot of really valuable information. Now you can call up the organization, posing as someone who's a friend or a family member or colleague, and say, oh yeah, you know what? I know Jen is on vacation this weekend, isn't getting back, but been working with her on this. And could you send me this while she's away, this piece of information while she's away? You know, now's the time. CFO's away. Now's the time to trick the controller or whatever and utilize that information. Also, this is an interesting one that's developed in recent years, which is that governments are subsidizing internet connectivity. It used to be the case that the hackers were in Russia and China and more developed countries that had easier access to bandwidth and technology. Now we're seeing that a lot of developing nations, formerly known as third world countries, are now, as an economic development engine, putting large subsidies for internet bandwidth to be spread throughout, even in these remote villages, for individuals to be given smartphones or tablets or other internet connected devices. And what happens when you put people who are in really desperate situations next to people who have wealth, whether it be wealth of data or actual financial wealth? What happens is you see a lot of crime, and that's precisely what has taken place. Additionally, compliance requirements are continue to expand. So if you work in Massachusetts, you've got the Massachusetts Privacy Law, 201 CMR 17 to contend with. In New Hampshire, New Hampshire is one of the lowest regulated cybersecurity law or least demanding cybersecurity laws in the nation. But yet recently there was a House Bill 1680, that was sent through, and it died in committee. But so it's not coming immediately, but you know, we have good reason to suspect that that's going to prop back up in a different form. And to give you an example, 1680 was about as onerous as the California privacy law, which is the most onerous in the whole country, which is why in our Live Free or Die state it got shot down in committee. But it's likely to come back up in potentially a lesser form, but still much more significant than what it is now, and may even go past the demands of the Massachusetts privacy law. You know, if you take credit cards, you're under PCI compliance. If you're in the Department of Defense supply chain, then you're under either NIST 800-171 or the new CMMC guidelines, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Guideline. And then even if you don't have those federal or state compliances, well, you're going to have state compliance. But even if you don't have federal or those broader industry level compliances, you might still end up having vendor requirements, you know, organizations that you work with or for that have requirements put on you, or client requirements, what have you. And then lastly, you know, this COVID-19 situation has dramatically changed our economy and culture. And as I said previously, you know, these changes aren't just going to go away. Over the last few months, so many organizations have moved remote, and the people are getting used to new tools and are often playing real fast and loose with security. And you know who's not taking the time off is the hackers. And hackers, remember, are not just guys in hoodies. Anytime you see a presentation that's related to cybersecurity, it's like a guarantee that you're going to see a slide with a guy with a hoodie. I believe we have one in ours. I always try to make sure that it gets in there so I can keep up the stereotype. So the hackers are often not just guys in hoodies, but they are organizations that are in these other countries, and they are out to get data. They are out to get trade secrets. They are out to get money. And it's easy for us to think that money, you know, when we think of $10, we think of a physical piece of paper with Alexander Hamilton's face on it. But in reality, $10 is ones and zeros most of the time sitting on a server somewhere. And when those ones and zeros are compromised, that money is gone. Now, the good news is that there's an opportunity here, which is if your organization takes this seriously, then you can treat cybersecurity as a competitive advantage. You know, your clients want their data to be secure. And depending on the industry that you're in, being compliant may actually be the only way or the best way to win business. You know, if you're in the DoD supply chain, for instance, and you are one of the first to get into CMMC compliance, well, you're going to have an ability to win bids and contracts that no one else is going to. And we're seeing even organizations that are not under heavy compliance, winning business because they're able to show in the sales process that they take security very seriously. They take the data of their clients and partners very seriously. So there's an opportunity here to treat this as a competitive advantage. Now, what happens if you don't, though? What happens if you say, yeah, heard it all before. I don't know. I don't think we're a real target. And I'm just not going to get ahead of this. Well, the consequences of this could be compromised bank, credit card, and retirement accounts. Going back to the idea that all of the money in those accounts, whether they're business, personal, are all ones and zeros. There's extortion. Modern day extortion is just email phishing attempts. There's downtime. There's a great story I love about an IT manager who went to his boss, the owner of the company, and said, I think you need to give everyone in our company an extra week's worth of paid vacation. And the owner's like, you crazy? And our average staff salary is this. If we did that, it would be such a huge financial loss. And the IT manager very deftly said, well, that's exactly what you did last week when you denied me the $2,000 spam filter I requested. Because since we don't have good spam filtering, it means that our employees are spending at least 10 minutes a day trying to sort through spam in email. And 10 minutes a day, if you multiply that out over the course of a full over the course of a full work year, ends up being a full 40 hours, so entire work week. And so you've basically given everyone a paid vacation, but one that they're not going to appreciate, and that's going to put our company at greater risk. So, downtime is a real serious concern when it comes to security. And then there are PR nightmares. There's no cyber liability insurance that's going to pay you back for lost reputation and lost clients. And well, you may get some lost client reimbursement for a period, but reputation is something that we all guard so jealously. I think at Mainstay, it's like on the surface, we sell IT services and information security services, but really what we sell to our clients is trust. And if that trust is violated, why would they want to come to us for expertise? You know what I mean? And then, the inability, as I mentioned, to qualify for proposals or be able to win bids, or just the ability to look as attractive to potential prospective clients. All right, so what I want to do is talk through 8 specific security measures that I think are of particular importance in this new world of both increased compliance demands and remote work. So the first, and then at the end, I want to talk about some more general principles that to be thinking of. The first is to increase our awareness. We all need to increase our awareness and the awareness of our teams on recent social engineering attacks. So some examples of this would be social engineering attempts, or just the simple way to put this is email phishing attempts that are threatening or giving us giving us information or links or attachments related to the coronavirus, COVID-19. Lots of emails going around now. I think I've got an email now from every CEO of every company I've ever had any interaction with about their response to COVID-19. And these are just easy pickings now because there's so many of these emails coming out. And so you can cut and paste one of those, put a malicious link in behind one of the links, and have people download CryptoLocker viruses or keyloggers or any of these kinds of malicious malware. Another one is IRS requests or policies. Lots of phishing attempts going around that claim to be from the IRS related to, PPP money, or to whatever I don't remember what the subsidy was called that went to individuals, but there's so many things, or even just taxes. We're in tax season. Changes in payroll requests is another one. So if you get an email, if you're in finance, for instance, and you get an email from an employee that says, "Hey, I want to count my payroll delivered to a different account, and here's the account number." These all need to be voice verified now. We can no longer ever accept emails as being the triggers to make a financial change or move sensitive data or sensitive accounts. DocuSign links, there's a ton of those where you get something that says, "Hey, please sign this. I need this to process this next invoice." Internet browsing history threats. This is an interesting one. one of the most powerful ones that gets clicked on the most is people will get an email that will say some variation on the theme of, we have your internet viewing records, and we also have your contacts, your email contacts. And if you do not pay us X number, this amount of Bitcoin, then we are going to send your internet viewing history to your contacts. Because a lot of people are not going places on the internet that they ought to. And they go, oh my goodness, my mom is on my contact list. They will pay almost any amount of money to prevent that kind of shame and embarrassment. And so these, what are called sextortion scams, are incredibly powerful. And what they'll often do in those kinds of emails is they'll send you, in the email, they'll show you in plain text some of your passwords that have been leaked on the dark web. So, psychologically, you're like, oh my goodness, they do have me, they've got me. And so I'm going to have to pay this money. When in reality, most of those, not all, but most of those are not real at all. And those go to a mass number of email addresses, and it's a false threat. But sometimes it's a real threat. And because you don't know, they end up being very, very successful. But it's something where you need to be aware, and your people need to be aware that those things might come. Account verifications. You may get an email that says, hey, your Microsoft 365 or Office 365 account has been, there's a security compromise, and you need to change your password in order to fix this. And so you click this link in this email to change your password. You click the link, and it looks like a Microsoft branded page. It says, click your former password here to change it. And then you put in your former password, and it sends you over to another screen and says, okay, change to this. What you didn't realize is that former password has now been collected, and nothing changed when you went to that second screen. That didn't actually change your password to that, but now hackers have access to your password and use that password across multiple accounts, and you can be really in bad shape. If that same password is used for your retirement account, your bank account, now you could be, or your company, or the company bank account or something like that, then you could be in real trouble. And the last one is cloud file sharing. Is a lot of now, it looks like you're getting an encrypted email message from ShareFile or something like that. When actually you're clicking on a link, it's not an encrypted email at all. It's not a cloud file sharing email at all. It's a malicious link. So what you have to do then is you need to, once you create that awareness amongst your team, and as I said, we'll send you the notes here. So these are things you can send out as an email to your team. Hopefully your IT team or your information security team is you have some sort of training being provided by that team that they are delivering to you. And so hopefully this is not new information to your organization. If it is, it's a real concern. But in fact, that's really related to this next point, is that we need to train our users on not only what these threats are, but then what the best practices are to handle them. So 91%, this is an interesting stat, 91% of all security breaches at least begin with email. This is from 2 years ago, the Verizon's cybersecurity report. 91% is a pretty high number, and doesn't mean that all of them end that way. Some move from email to something else, but they at least start as some sort of phishing email. So how do you respond to that? Well, you need yourself, and you need to encourage your team to first, don't click on links if you don't need to. And I usually recommend, in fact, our clients to never click on links in emails, unless they are 100%, not 95%, but 100% sure it's from a trusted source. And the number one link that you don't want to click on an email, it's counterintuitive. It's the unsubscribe link. Why is that? Well, the unsubscribe link, if you were creating malicious email and sending it out, which is the one link that you'd want to ensure had a malicious, that if someone sort of picked up that it was malicious, that at least they would click one of those buttons. Well, it would be the unsubscribe button, and that's what we see. All the other links are clean, and then the unsubscribe link is the one that's a dirty link. Second, don't click on the download images. In Outlook, how it will give you a download images or view images. Don't click on that button for any email that doesn't come through correctly, or if you're not sure if the source is trusted. Never click that link, and that's because it enables macros, which will essentially enable any of the malicious code that was integrated into that email. Now, some people get afraid and they say, "Oh, I see a malicious email. I haven't clicked on anything, but it's just come through. Am I Am I going to be compromised just by opening that email? And the answer is no. As a general rule, you're not going to be, because none of those macros are able to be initiated. I still say don't open them. Try not to open them if they seem malicious, because the likelihood that you might accidentally click on a link or forget, get distracted, and then go back to it and forget that it was, that you were suspicious, and then click on the attachment or whatever. So try not to click the link or to open them at all, but you're not going to be compromised just by opening. But that's why you don't want to click links, attachment, and enable this macro by clicking the download images. And then the last thing on this is to voice verify. This is the most important one, which is that if you get an email that purports to be from, the executive director or the CEO, you can't just simply, it used to be that you could open up a new email, put their email address in and say, hey, I got an email that looked like it was from you. Can you send it over? Or excuse me, can you verify that was you? Problem is now is their whole account may be compromised. So you're just going to get an email back that says, yeah, that was from me. What you have to do now is actually have to pick up the phone and say, hey, I got this email. Looked like it was from you. Was it? No? Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks so much. Or yes, it was. Okay, perfect. I'll handle that. Voice verification is the key. And really, you might say, well, how am I going to remember this? Even if I get the notes from you, I'm not the kind of person who's, not my role to send this email out to all of our users to make them aware of this. Well, this is why user training should really be a part of your onboarding process. And it should be updated at least once a year so that you're making your users aware of these new threats and how to combat them. And so this is where you need to work with IT or with HR or both to ensure that that's really a part of the onboarding process. Next up here is utilize a password manager. So we've known for a long time that the key is to have long, complex password for any of our accounts. Right? We've all known that. What we need to focus on much more than long and complex, though, is unique passwords for each account, which means that if you have 30 accounts, 50 accounts, 100 accounts across the internet, each of them needs to have their own separate and distinct password. Now, probably some people, if you're not playing solitaire or Minesweeper or checking email, there's people throwing things at their screens right now saying, I have tons of accounts. How in the world am I going to have a separate password for each account? Well, the only way to do that is to have what's called a password manager, which is basically a vault where all of your passwords sit behind. One of the objections, and I'll give you a couple examples of this. LastPass is a great one, and there's one called KeePass, K-E-E-P-A-S-S, not K-E-Y, K-E-E-P-A-S-S. LastPass is a cloud-hosted one, and KeePass is a local one. So KeePass is technically more secure because it's not integrated into the internet the way that LastPass is. But LastPass is also a great one. And one of the objections that comes up when you talk about this is, well, if I have all my passwords in a password manager, and what if the password manager gets hacked? Well, this is where the question is of like, what's more secure? Is it more secure to have a single password or a couple passwords that are sort of spread all across the internet and function as basically like a master key to all of your most sensitive data and your money? Or is it more secure to have have unique passwords so that there's no master key and have those living behind a really tightly locked vault? Well, it's no question which is more secure. And security is never about eliminating risk. It's about mitigating it. It's figuring out where our least risky options are, not where our no risk options are, because typically the only way to get to a no risk option is to die. You can, even if you live in a van down by the river, like a good New Hampshire libertarian, you are still going to deal with risks. It's just different ones, right? Public health risks, or it's the risk of being mauled by a bear. You're not getting away from risk in life. It's about mitigating the risks and figuring out how to do that most effectively. Next, utilize multi-factor authentication. This is basically where you, instead of thinking of having a single form of authentication that's required in order to get into data, you have to have multiple. So, and they have to be of a different form or factor as well, which is why it's called multi-factor or two-factor authentication. A single factor would be something that you can know, like a password. Problem with something you know is that something you know can also be guessed or cracked. So if it's a password combination, well, someone could guess that, especially if it's, if Tom Brady 12 is your password, or if it's your, daughter's name and birth year, or whatever of the various super common combinations. Those are easy to guess. I like to actually, when I'm with my friends, I like to do an IT nerd, cybersecurity nerd thing and guess their passwords. And usually after a handful of attempts, I can get them sort of play 20 questions and I can guess people's passwords. It's a fun party trick. But unfortunately, it's a party trick that has an ultimate point, which is that it's not nearly as difficult to crack your passwords as you probably think. And there are tools out there that can guess a lot more effectively than a human being can, that you can get for free on Google. So you need to have a second form of authentication, which means not something you just know, but something that you physically have or something that you physically are. So for instance, when a lot of you use this, I'm sure already, if you have a bank account where you log in, you have to get a secondary code. You might think, well, wait, that secondary code that gets emailed to my, or emailed to my email address, or sent to my phone. Well, that's just something I know. So isn't that another just single factor, a single form of authentication? Well, no, it isn't, because let's say if it's a text message that comes to your phone with a particular code, well, that means in order to get that code, someone would not only have to have guessed your password, but have stolen your phone, And so that's a much higher level of security than just having that single form of authentication. The next question then becomes, well, where do I layer on that multi-factor authentication? Well, I'd give you 3 or 4 key examples. First is bank accounts, whether it be private or business. 2 would be remote access. And I've seen this a ton over the last 3 months, where organizations will utilize something like VPN or remote desktop services to log into the local server, or to a docking or desktop computer at the office, and they'll log into their VPN solution, the remote access solution. There's no 2-factor authentication that they have to go through in order to log into VPN. And that's really dicey, because VPN is a way to get into your organization remotely. And so that's one of those areas that's really critical to have 2-factor authentication. Also, email. And the good news is Microsoft gives 2-factor authentication licensing for free. It just has to be implemented. So if you're using Office 365, you can get that for free, just to be done. And your IT team really should be bringing that to you as a key recommendation. And lastly, any applications where there's just sensitive data. If you have an ERP solution, or you're using QuickBooks and there's sensitive data in there, or you have an HRMS or whatever, those are great things to put 2-factor authentication behind. Use what's called full tunnel VPN. Now, this may only be interesting to any of you that are a little more technical in nature, but it's worth mentioning. There are 2 kinds of ways of doing VPN, and because there's, this presentation is all about how to both have a better culture and be more secure in a remote work environment. I thought this would be helpful to talk through, which is that there's 2 ways to implement VPN. Or VPN stands for a virtual private network. Okay, it's a way to securely go from your computer into a computer at an office, or into a server in either a local server or a server hosted in the cloud. Most of the time, the default setting for VPN is called split tunnel VPNing, which basically is just when the traffic you're pulling and pushing to and from the local server, local desktop, is encrypted. Full tunnel VPNing is when all of the data that's going back and forth, regardless of whether it's connected to the computer or to the server that you're pulling information back from, all the data is being protected. So this is the normal way that you would have, like if you were in an office, you'd have full encryption end to end. And so full tunnel VPNing is actually the closest to a sort of one-to-one experience as working at the office, and a closest thing to a one-to-one security structure as when you're physically in the office. So it's a really worthwhile thing to talk to your IT team and say, hey, do we have split tunnel VPNing or full tunnel VPNing? There are good reasons, by the way, that I won't go into to have split tunneling. So if they say, yeah, it's split tunneling, it doesn't mean your IT firm is sitting down on the job, or your internal IT staff is sitting down on the job, but you should at least poke into that and understand why they're doing split tunneling versus full tunneling, to make sure that there's really it's being thought through instead of just sort of falling into default settings. Because you really want full tunnel VPNing to, a way of thinking of it is to apply all of the same security policies that you would have in the office. All right, change your home wireless default password. Your default wireless password should also be something that's long, complex, and unique. And you need to, now that if you're using your home wireless and you're using it for business purposes, you need to go, what I would recommend, there's an easy way to do this. Some of you might think, man, that sounds complicated. I don't even know how to log into that thing. Simple thing to do is just physically go to where that wireless is and write down the model number. Then go to Google and put in the model number and say how to change password for this model number. And it will give you, you'll find on Google very easy steps. Usually it's only 1 or 2 step process to go and change that default password. Now, another option is to utilize a more sophisticated business router that's provided by your IT firm directly, but it's a lot more costly. And certainly as an initial step, change those default passwords. Next, try to avoid the use of home computers, especially in terms of shared home computers. We recommend that, if you have to do work from a work computer. In the likelihood that you are going to have, poor, and your staff are going to have poor internet best practices and go to the places where they ought to go on the internet and not do silly things like download free screensavers. Like, people's awareness is going to be much more heightened when they're on a work computer. And the problem is if they're doing this unsafe practices on their home computer and then accessing your company network or your company data, it opens the opportunity for that company data to be compromised, because maybe they have a keylogger now that's sitting on their home computer that someone has been able to pick up and now knows what the passwords are for your work systems or your work applications. Not a good thing. And you, especially if you have to use home computers, make sure that you outline very clearly as a policy for your staff that no one else in their family or their friends should ever be able to use those computers as well, because now you're even a further step removed from the safe practices. You have no idea what that person's son or wife or husband is going to accidentally do on the internet that's going to have repercussions down the line that they're not even thinking, because they don't even work for the company. Be aware of the security vulnerabilities of Zoom. I had a friend of mine who works in a hospital in Columbus, and he said this happened several weeks ago. They had a scenario where all of their Zoom meetings, and they were doing a ton of them for the hospital. This is a hospital that employs, like I think 2,000, 3,000 people. And all of the Zoom meetings on this particular day were not only hijacked, they were hijacked with pornography. So they would be in the middle of these meetings and all of a sudden pornographic images or videos were popping up on Zoom. That's something where, in a certain sense, from a PR standpoint and from just like an experience standpoint, like, it's just a horrible thing for employees to have to have happen. But at least in that situation, it's not like direct data or information is being stolen. But the problem is you just don't know what else is going behind the scenes. You don't know if that is a distraction, sort of a social engineering distraction technique, while someone gets into company computers or servers. There's all kinds of bad things. So some recommendations around this: if you use Zoom on the regular, first, don't make meetings or classrooms public. In Zoom, there's 2 options. You can make either a meeting private or you can make a meeting public. And when you make a meeting private, it requires a meeting password, and they have to use a waiting room feature in order to get the admittance into that meeting. So you really want to do that. Also, don't share a link to like a private meeting. Don't share it in a public way. Share it on the company website or social media, that kind of thing. Also, thirdly, manage screen sharing options. So in Zoom, make sure that you set screen sharing option host only, so that no one can come in and add extra images or control and take and do additional screenshotting and that kind of thing. And then last on this is, I mentioned during our last session, but consider using Microsoft Teams if you're doing a lot of video conferencing internally, because again, you're able to utilize a lot more granular security permissions that you can work with IT to enforce and to ensure than you can in a platform like Zoom. All right, in our remaining minutes, I just want to share some picture principles that I hope will be helpful in guiding and directing the way you're thinking about information security and integrating this into your remote company cultures. First is to recognize the difference between technical and organizational security. As I referenced earlier, if you were to ask most CEOs or CFOs and you were to say, hey, how are you doing related to security? How's your organization related to security? They're often going to tell you, well, let me ask IT. Or they're going to say, yeah, we just had an IT strategic planning meeting. We talked about security a bunch, and we're going to implement these technical security controls. What you need to realize, though, is that technical security or IT security is only one part of really a threefold requirement in order to have a secure organization. So if you see on your screen, there's three circles within a Venn diagram. You have on the bottom left, you have IT or information technology. Information technology does have a role to play in security, but it's specific technical controls. So things like two-factor authentication or something like a secure firewall or locking down particular ports on your firewall. Those are the kinds of things, managing your security boundary. Those are things that IT does. But then over to the right, you see information systems. Information systems, the purview of IS, are all of the applications and the data. And you can see, you might think, oh, wait, isn't that all of IT's responsibility? Well, no, because IT's purview are the systems. IT's purview is the network, the servers, the individual computers. Think of it like this. IT's purview are the pipes. And IS's purview, or information systems purview, is data flowing in and out of those pipes. And IT sometimes knows things about that data, but not always. And you can't expect them to. Information systems is its own skill set, own practice area. And a lot of times, information systems are managed internally within an organization. And how data is flowing and the security of those workflows is connected to people internally managing that. And IT may not know about it all. And I'm going to explain how these all come together in a second. Then the top one is information security. Information security, the way I think about this is information security are all of the organizational elements of security that are not necessarily related to your applications, which IS is in their purview, and IT, which is the network infrastructure, the server infrastructure, the individual devices, and so on. So the upshot of this is that if you want to be secure as an organization, you need security in all three of these circles. You need secure IT, you need secure data, and you need a secure organization, which means you need secure workflows and organizational policies and all of that. So if you look to IT to be the be all and end all of security, it shows that pretty much you've already admitted to not being secure just by having that expectation. So another way of thinking of this is that what your organization needs is an information security program. An information security program should sit underneath and be the foundation stone to ensure the security in all of these other areas. So you need secure facilities, right? You need actual physical security. Now we're talking a lot in our conversation about remote work, but for most organizations, they're still going to have some sort of physical office even coming out of that. So you need those office spaces to be secure, or manufacturing facilities, or what have you. You need secure employees. And this is where the training piece comes in that I referenced before. You can have the world's greatest IT security and have all kinds of technical controls. But if your people are sending malicious, forwarding malicious links around, or clicking links that they ought not to, or not understanding this world and what the threats are, you're not going to be secure. You need secure workflows, which is how you share information, how you, who reports to who within the organization, and how those reporting structures map to who has what permissions within the within your server infrastructure and your file management systems and so on. Then you need secure technology, which is the primary purview of IT proper. You need the actual secure network, server, and device infrastructure. All of those sit on top of an information security program. And so you really need an information security team to help define that, to understand what your compliances are. Typically, defining your information security program means understanding what your compliance requirements are and understanding what your risks are, and saying, how do we create a program that gives us secure facilities, secure employees, secure workflows, and secure technology? And that needs to dictate what your facility, your facilities people do. It needs to dictate what your training program looks like. It needs to facilitate what IT is doing. It needs to set the roadmap for IT and set the roadmap for organizational workflows as well. So what are the pieces of an information security program? Well, just really briefly, they are periodic risk assessments where you have a process for uncovering, identifying, and implementing both technical, administrative, and physical gaps in your security controls. And these risk assessments are required by many compliances anyway. So if you're, let's say, under HIPAA, those require periodic risk assessments. Or if you're in the DoD supply chain, risk assessments are required. So this is the first place to start when you're talking about putting together your information security program, because until you know what your risks are, you can't put together a program to mitigate them. Second, you have well thought through policies, things like acceptable use policies and change management policies and incident response policies, et cetera. And you might think policies are just pieces of paper that live on a shelf somewhere, but in reality, policies are the decisions we make as an organization. They are the business decisions that guide what we do and how we do it. And if those are not secure, then good luck getting a firewall that's going to solve that problem. It's impossible. You then have secure and compliant organizational workflows. So things like principle of least privilege. If let's say a CEO, they might be highest up on the totem pole, but does that mean that they should have all access to all data within the organization? I would argue no, because unless they need that information, it shouldn't be given to them. Access to it and privileged access shouldn't be given to it. You might think, man, that seems harsh. I mean, CEOs should have access to everything, shouldn't they? Well, no, because if they have, let's say, permissions on a server to access certain files that they don't need, and then if they get a CryptoLocker virus on their computer, that virus can then utilize all of their wide open permissions, piggyback on those, and then encrypt and delete all of that data that they have permission. So you want to make sure everyone within the organization has only the access to information that they need to do their jobs. And that's just one example. Principle of least privilege is one example of secure and compliant organizational workflows that you need to have in place. That should be a part of your information security program. You should also have compliance governance, where you're managing the compliances in an ongoing way. You need to have insurance review, so you have the proper cyber liability and cyber crime insurance. And then you need to have an ongoing staff training program, as I'd mentioned. All of those combined make up an information security program, and those need to be managed effectively. So just to wrap up here, and we'll get to some questions and answers. Some services for everyone to consider coming out of both of these discussion elements is that, you ought to be looking for the right kinds of partners to help you with, both the proactive business consulting that's going to help you manage this whole world of moving to remote culture effectively. You're working with the right business consultants. And then you need to have the right, both technology partners on the IT side and the right technology partners on the information security side to help ensure that you can both have a great, delightful company culture, but also a really secure and safe one. So, Mainstay in particular, how we can help in this process is that we are a managed IT and information security services firm. We're actually one of the only firms that can say that in New England, where we do both sides of that coin. We both do the technical side and help with the organizational side. And so we have information security program managers and information security specialists to help really ensure both that your organization is secure and your technology is secure. And we do that both comprehensively, but then we also do supplemental services as well. So if you have an internal IT team already, for instance, we may be able to, depending on the nature of that team and how that's structured, we may be able to come in and support them, guide and direct to help them ensure this kind of security. And then if you're just not sure and you kind of have this suspicion, well, I sort of feel like we're secure, but I'm not quite sure. One of the things we can provide are either IT assessments, where we evaluate your whole network infrastructure, server infrastructure, as well as your IT management and support, and help give you really good insight on where there may be gaps there and where things are going really well. And we're really careful, by the way, to not treat that as like a sales tool. We try to treat that as a standalone service, so we get paid for, so there doesn't need to be any kind of connective tissue to ongoing services, so that we can ensure that there's really high value there. And additionally, we do not only IT assessments, but risk assessments. So if you feel like you're not sure, not just related to IT management and your IT systems, but security in particular, we can do a comprehensive risk assessment. Or if there's just simply a particular compliance, HIPAA or CMMC or Massachusetts privacy law, PCI, or FINRA, or whatever the compliance you're under is, if you're just not sure where your gaps are related to that particular compliance, we can do what's called a gap analysis. We're measuring your systems and your policies and all of that against what the requirements are of that particular compliance and help you understand what your gaps are. So I hope that's a helpful overview of thinking about developing the right partnerships and the right services in order to do this really effectively. So let's close out with if there's any additional questions. There's no additional questions. Amazing. So I don't know whether that means that I did such an amazing job that in articulating it, that it was just super clear. I hope that's the case. Hopefully it was not distractions from Minesweeper and Solitaire. But as you can see on the screen there, that Corey's email address is up there again, choit@mstech.com. If you're interested in getting the PowerPoint or the notes for this presentation, feel free to message him. And if you just have additional questions as well, you can either email Corey or you can email me directly. My email address is rrobinson, as in Ryan Robinson, rrobinson@mstech.com, mstech.com. Happy to, if there's, I know in these kinds of settings, a lot of times people don't want to answer or ask questions in a sort of public manner. And oftentimes there's sort of nuance related to it as well. So more than happy to dialogue with any of you individually. Thank you so much again to KBW and to Next Level Now and to Nathan Wexler for putting this on. I really appreciate it. Hope it was valuable for you. And please provide any, additionally, any feedback. If you have suggestions, ways that we can improve, feel free to message here and give us feedback. We'd love to get that. Hope this finds everyone well and living in very delightful company cultures despite the move we've made here, and secure company cultures despite our increased attack services. And I genuinely hope that I'll be able to meet some of you in person sometime soon, and we'll be able to, who knows whether handshakes will ever come back, but whatever the new code ends up being, I hope to see you all in person sometime soon. All right. Thank you so much and take care.